This interview was never meant to be heard. Carl Jung reveals the terrifying truth about the fool, a figure society mocks, but secretly fears. And if you listen closely, you may realize you are the fool. They told Jung to avoid the subject. They warned him not to speak of this archetype. The fool, after all, is not simply a jester or a clown. He is the first character in the great psychological journey of the soul, the beginning and the end. And in that duality, there is danger. Jung once leaned forward during a quiet conversation with a student and whispered, "The fool is closer to God than the priest." That sentence alone, they said, could end his career. But Jung didn't care. To him, truth was more sacred than approval. In every mythology, every spiritual tradition, and every inner journey, there is always a fool. But why? The fool, Jung said, is the one who dares to step into the unknown. Society laughs at him, calls him naive. But the fool sees something others do not. He is pure potential. He carries the seed of transformation, and that's what makes him so threatening. You see, the fool is not stupid. He plays dumb to survive. He wears the mask to disarm. In truth, he is the most awake character in the entire psychological pantheon. He walks with empty pockets, but carries the soul of the universe in his heart. Where others cling to structure, to titles, to logic, the fool moves with instinct, mystery, and courage. And for that, he is punished. When Jung studied medieval alchemy, he kept seeing a recurring image. A crowned fool standing in fire, smiling, untouched by the flames. That image haunted him. How could someone so unguarded, so exposed, be so untouchable? It contradicted everything. Then he realized the fool is untouchable not because he is strong in the conventional sense, but because he surrenders. He doesn't resist life. He dives into chaos, trusting something deeper than intellect. And because of that, nothing can truly harm him. Jung was obsessed with paradox, and the fool is the ultimate paradox. He is both ridiculous and divine, insane and enlightened. He breaks rules not out of rebellion, but out of truth. And when he speaks, people often laugh. Not because he's wrong, but because he's too right for comfort. Think of the court jester, the only person allowed to mock the king. Why? Because the fool speaks truth through humor. He dances on the edge of madness and genius. He doesn't care about power. That's why power fears him. In the early days of Jung's private seminars, when he spoke of archetypes, he would often pause when he came to the fool, as if choosing his words carefully, as if he knew he was crossing a line. The fool, he said one day, is the only one who doesn't wear a mask, because his entire being is the mask, and that makes him invisible to the world and visible to the divine. That sentence shocked the room. Silence followed. But it wasn't just metaphor. Jung believed the fool is a living force within each of us. Not just a character, but a psychological current. And if you ignore it, it punishes you. If you suppress the fool inside you, you become rigid, cold, terrified of life. But if you embraced him, you risk embarrassment, pain, even exile, but you also touch freedom. The modern man, Jung said, has killed the fool within himself. And because of that, he is dying of seriousness. That quote was pulled from transcripts never published, because those who ran the institutes, the medical boards, the academies, they didn't want that kind of thinking out there. It was too dangerous. If people believed the fool was holy, they might stop obeying systems. They might start listening to themselves. And yet, over and over, Jung insisted, the fool knows something. He walks blindly, but it's not ignorance. It's trust. Trust in the psyche. Trust in the self. He is a wanderer guided by an inner voice others have long forgotten. When he visited Africa, Jung observed tribal rituals where the village fool played a central role in healing ceremonies. They laughed at him. But they also listened to him. Because sometimes the fool was the only one brave enough to say what no one else would. To name the wound no one else could admit. And Jung wondered, what if our modern world has lost its healing because it has lost its fools? In private letters to colleagues, Jung wrote about dreams. His patients often dreamed of falling, of making mistakes in public, of being naked in front of others. He said these were dreams of the fool archetype emerging, reminding the dreamer to stop pretending, to let go of the image, and to return to innocence. But innocence is dangerous in a world built on performance. One of Jung's most controversial statements came in a small, handwritten note found among his personal papers. The fool will inherit the earth, because he is the only one empty enough to be filled. That's the part no one wanted published, because it flies in the face of everything society teaches. We're told to be competent, smart, perfect. But Jung says, be foolish, be humble, be raw, because that's where the gold is hidden. When people hear fool, they imagine someone weak. But in psychology, weakness is often a mask for great strength. And the fool's strength is this: he has nothing to lose. He doesn't cling. He moves. He trusts. Jung knew this archetype was vital for our survival. Because without the fool, we lose the ability to begin. And all healing begins with a step into the unknown. The fool walks off the cliff in the tarot card, not because he's stupid, but because he knows something will catch him, or he will fly. And Jung believed that is the ultimate secret. The fool jumps, and in that jump, in that total surrender, lies transformation. This isn't philosophy. This is survival. In a world obsessed with perfection, the fool reminds us to be messy, to be real, to cry in public, to laugh too loud, to say the wrong thing, to start again. Because deep down, all of us are tired of pretending. And the fool says, stop pretending, start living. This is why the banned interview exists. Because if too many people hear this, the system crumbles. But maybe it should. Because what Jung uncovered is not just a psychological concept, it's a revolution of the soul. And it starts with you. Jung once said, the fool brings light into the darkest parts of the psyche by accident. But what if that accident isn't random? What if it's divine strategy? The fool enters where no other archetype dares. Into the shame, into the wound, into the ridiculous moments that we all try to hide. And instead of covering them up, he trips over them, exposes them, and laughs anyway. That laughter is not mockery, it's medicine. It's the soul remembering that it doesn't have to be perfect to be whole. In one private lecture, Jung described a patient who was deeply depressed, paralyzed by the pressure to be successful, admired, respected. Everything about her screamed competence, but she couldn't sleep. She couldn't breathe. And then one night, she had a dream. In it, she was wearing a clown costume, dancing in front of a room of people who were laughing at her. She woke up crying, ashamed. Jung smiled and told her, "This is not humiliation. This is liberation." He explained that her dream was her soul's attempt to break the prison of her false self. That clown costume wasn't an insult. It was an invitation. The psyche was saying, "Loosen up. Let the mask fall. You don't need to be perfect to be loved." And that's the fool's greatest gift. He teaches us that vulnerability is power. That being laughed at is not the worst thing. Being fake is. Jung believed his archetype was so feared because it shattered the illusions people built their lives around. The illusion of control. The illusion of certainty. The illusion of identity. The fool walks into all of that and says, "What if none of this is real? What if you let it fall apart?" In society, those who do that are often called crazy. But in ancient traditions, they were called holy. In Hinduism, there's the Abhituta, one who behaves like a madman, but is actually enlightened. In Zen, the great fool who acts absurdly to break the student's attachment to logic. In Sufism, the Majzub, the one so drunk on God that he forgets how to function in the world. And Jung saw all these figures as expressions of the same thing, the liberating chaos of the fool. He warned, however, that embracing this archetype was not a game. It was dangerous. Because if you go too far, you risk losing your footing in the world entirely. The fool walks the razor's edge between enlightenment and madness, between breakthrough and breakdown. And that's why it's a sacred path, not a stilly one. There's a reason the fool is both the first and the last card in the tarot. He starts the journey and he ends it. Because life is circular. You begin with naivety. You go through the stages of knowledge, power, identity. And at the end, if you're lucky, you return not to ignorance, but to sacred innocence. That's when you become the true fool, the wise one who knows he knows nothing. Jung's colleagues hated when he talked like this. It made them uncomfortable, too mystical, too irrational. But Jung didn't care. I would rather be whole, he said, than be good. And that's the essence of the fool. Wholeness over goodness. Authenticity over approval. Truth over performance. He even claimed once, in a quiet moment, that most psychological disorders were not signs of illness, but symptoms of a soul denied its fool. People go mad because they're trying too hard to be sane. They're choking on the mask. They're crushed under the weight of trying to be someone they're not. And so the psyche revels. It trips. It embarrasses. It sabotages. Not because it hates you, but because it's trying to set you free. The fool is not the enemy. He's the jailbreak. Carl Jung once wrote in the margins of a letter, "The true danger is not the fool within you. The true danger is what happens when you silence him." And we do silence him, constantly. As children, we're told to sit still, stop laughing, stop imagining, stop being silly. We're taught that success means control, that wisdom means restraint. But what if the deepest wisdom is wild? What if the fool is the only one who remembers how to be fully alive? One of Jung's patients was a successful banker, a man who had everything: money, status, admiration. But he was haunted by dreams of falling down stairs, of losing his shoes, of public humiliation. He confessed, in one session, "I'm terrified of looking stupid." Jung replied, "Then you've already built a prison, and the fool is trying to break you out." The man didn't understand, at first, but over time, he began to let go. He started painting, dancing, speaking clumsily in public just to feel the terror and survive it. Slowly, the panic turned into freedom. The mask cracked, and through the cracks, joy entered. This is what Jung wanted the world to know. That healing is not about perfection. It's about surrendering to the parts of you you've exiled. Especially the messy, weird, wild parts. Especially the fool. Because without him, you forget how to live. You forget how to risk, how to love, how to laugh in the face of the unknown. And that's the greatest tragedy of all. But the world doesn't want you to know that. That's why this interview was banned. That's why these pages never made it into the textbooks. Because if people understood the power of the fool, they'd stop following rules. They'd start following life. Jung feared that modern psychology would become another church, filled with dogma and control. He believed the soul is too wild for cages, and the fool is the one who keeps reminding us of that. Even in his old age, when Jung was more philosopher than doctor, he would often pause mid-lecture, look out at the crowd, and smile quietly to himself, as if he saw something they didn't, something absurd, something holy. And then he would say, "Remember, the one who appears foolish may be the only one who's free." And then he would move on, leaving the audience unsettled, maybe even annoyed. Because he refused to give them easy answers. He refused to make sense in the way they wanted. Because that's what the fool does. He doesn't give answers. He gives permission. To fall, to fail, to feel, to start over. And in a world that punishes all of that, the fool becomes a revolutionary. In one of his last writings before his death, Jung scribbled a note that was never officially published. It said, "The world honors the wise man, but only the gods understand the fool." Think about that. The fool doesn't chase honor. He doesn't care about being understood. He dances through contradiction, speaks in riddles, and embraces what others reject. And by doing that, he becomes the bridge between opposites, between reason and madness, between light and shadow, between the divine and the human. Jung called this the sacred paradox. That what looks low is often high. What seems stupid is often profound. And what we dismiss because it's uncomfortable may be the only truth left untouched. This is why the fool threatens institutions, because he reveals the absurdity underneath their seriousness. He walks into the courtroom and slips on a banana peel. He strolls through academia with his shoes on the wrong feet. He's not there to be correct. He's there to wake people up. And waking up is painful. Jung said once that if he could prescribe just one cure to all his patients, it would be to let themselves be seen being ridiculous. Because nothing frees the soul faster than vulnerability without defense. He spoke of a time when he was giving a formal speech to a group of intellectuals in Vienna. Halfway through his talk, he completely forgot what he was saying. Blank mind. Silence. The audience looked at him, waiting. For one long, terrifying moment, he stood there, exposed. And then he laughed. Not a nervous chuckle. A deep, genuine laugh from the belly. "Ah," he said, "the gods are laughing at me again." The audience didn't know how to react. Some smiled politely. Others frowned, offended. But something changed in the room. The tension cracked. The walls came down. And afterward, people came up to him, not to praise the lecture, but to thank him for the moment he forgot. Because in that moment, he was real. That's the fool's gift. Realness. Raw, unrehearsed, unpolished humanity. And it's rare, because most people spend their entire lives pretending, trying to be the best version of themselves instead of the truest version. And in doing so, they forget who they were before the world told them who to be. The fool remembers. He remembers childhood. He remembers the joy of running without purpose, of laughing without cause, of falling and not caring who saw. That memory is medicine. It can dissolve years of repression in seconds, but only if you're willing to look foolish. Jung warned that the modern world was in danger, not because of violence or politics or war, but because it was forgetting the fool. Forgetting how to be spontaneous. Forgetting how to not know. Forgetting how to feel without filter. He once said, "We are drowning in knowledge, but starving for wisdom. And wisdom often comes dressed as nonsense." This is why his deeper interviews were kept hidden. Why the transcripts that touched on the mystical, the irrational, the fool, were never officially included in the collected works. They didn't fit the scientific image. They didn't fit the expectations. But Jung never cared about fitting in. He cared about being true. He called the fool the guardian of the soul's fire, the one who protects the spark when the world goes cold. And we need that spark now more than ever. Because people are burning out. They're performing their lives, smiling for likes, achieving for applause, living in masks so long they've forgotten their faces. But the fool doesn't care about applause. He claps for himself when no one else will. He dances in empty rooms. He sings off-key in the shower. He's not trying to impress. He's trying to feel. That's why he heals people. Because being around someone that free reminds you of your own cage. And that can either inspire you or enrage you. Jung said, "You will know you've met your fool when you feel both joy and discomfort in their presence." Joy, because they're alive in a way you forgot was possible. Discomfort, because they expose how much of you is still asleep. But the fool won't judge you. He doesn't live in hierarchies. He knows we're all just wandering through this mystery, tripping over our egos and calling it wisdom. And he's fine with that. He sees the whole human experience, embarrassment, failure, longing, as sacred. Not problems to be solved, but dances to be danced. One woman once told Jung, "I feel like I'm failing at life." He replied, "Maybe life isn't something to succeed at. Maybe it's something to survive, with grace and humor. That's the fool's way." And she cried, not because she was broken, but because someone finally saw her as whole, mess and all. This is what people don't understand. The fool doesn't ignore suffering. He transforms it. He doesn't deny pain. He finds the divine inside it. Jung believed this was the future of healing. Not more diagnoses, not more categories, but more courage. The courage to laugh while you're bleeding, to dance while you're afraid, to speak your truth, even when your voice shakes. He saw the fool not as a mask, but as a mirror, one that shows you what you've hidden, and then dares you to love it. And that's why this interview was banned. Because truth like that is explosive. It can't be controlled. It doesn't fit in textbooks. It doesn't sell products. It makes people free. And freedom is dangerous. But if you're still watching, then maybe you've already begun to remember. Remember the child who didn't care what people thought. Remember the moment you laughed at yourself and it felt like liberation. Remember the wild part of you that never died, just went quiet. Jung would want you to listen to that part again, to feed it, to play, to stumble, to let the mask slip and not rush to fix it. Because in that slipping, something sacred is revealed. And if the world calls you a fool for that, good. You might just be the only one who's finally awake.